Hi everybody! In November 2021, the Security and Exchange Board of India made an important announcement that changed the debt market forever. As it turns out, earlier, retail investors like us could only purchase bonds of those companies who were raising a minimum of 100 crore publicly and could invest as low as 1000 rupees in private placement. But now, with the new regulation, the minimum issue size requirement for a public debt issue was reduced from 100 crores to just 10 crores. And the minimum investment in a private issue was raised to 10 lakh rupees from meager amounts like 1000 rupees. Now, while most people might ignore this as yet another boring regulation, I gotta tell you that this seemingly unknown announcement opens up a $2 trillion opportunity for people like you and me. And not so surprisingly, there is one such startup that was founded by 4 ordinary boys that has already tapped on this market so well that they are now selling bonds worth 5 crore rupees every single day now. And they've been backed by none other than the Zerodha brothers and Kunalshah himself. This underrated startup that I'm talking about is Wint Wealth, which has already raised $2 million and is paving its way to become a giant bond aggregator in the market. And in this special episode, we sat with the Wint Wealth team themselves to understand their business model so that we could get you the first-hand information sourced directly from the founders themselves. And fortunately, they were kind enough to present the most critical insights exclusively to educate the thinkschool community. So the question is, what is this $1 trillion opportunity that has opened up in the debt market? How did Wint Wealth become a $1 million company by tapping onto this golden opportunity? And most importantly, what are the business lessons that we need to learn from this underrated new age startup in the debt market of India? This episode is going to be very intense, so please use a notebook or take screenshots of important pointers for better retention. The first thing you need to understand is how does a debt market work in the first place? So let's try to understand this using a very simple story. Let's say I want to start an ice cream company for which I need 10 lakh rupees as investment. I've got 5 lakh rupees in savings and I need to borrow an additional 5 lakh rupees. Now I could go to a bank, but that would involve a tedious and lengthy procedure. So instead, I decide to go to Parsh and request him to lend me 5 lakh rupees. Now Parsh is my best friend and he trusts my business acumen, so he's more than happy to lend me this sum of money. But even he's a shrewd businessman, right? So he gives me 2 options. He says, "Bhai, you either take this 5 lakh rupees as loan and pay it at the end of the year with interest, or you give me a 5% share in your company, which is nothing but 5% equity." Now I am super confident that in the very first year of my business itself, I'll be able to generate 2 crore rupees in profits. And when I do, I'll have to pay Parsh 10 lakh rupees in spite of taking just 5 lakhs if I give him 5% equity. Plus, I'll have to keep paying him a recurring sum of money every single year. And the only upside for this is that in case something drastic happens to my company and my company isn't able to generate profit, I won't have to pay him anything. And this is something I know for sure that will never happen. And hence, I will not choose the equity option. So I decide to go with the debt option to take a loan of 5 lakh rupees and will pay him a 12% interest, which means I'll have to pay an additional 60,000 rupees along with the principal of 5 lakh rupees. Which means I'll have to pay an additional 60,000 rupees along with the principal of 5 lakh rupees. Now this seems pretty reasonable, but the downside is that even if I'm not able to make this profit, I am still liable to pay Parsh 5.6 lakh rupees. And the reason why Parsh would trust me with this loan is because he knows that I have a house worth 25 lakh rupees which pays a rent of 10,000 rupees per month. So in the worst case scenario, I will either sell the house or let him take the rent to pay him back the money with interest. This is the basic difference between debt and equity. Now if you maximize all these numbers, you will understand very clearly how the bond market works. So let's say Tata Motors wants to raise 1000 crore via bond. Now, since they cannot take 1000 crore from a single person, they will create a bond of 10 lakh units with each unit costing 10,000 rupees. Now, Tata Motors can actually take a call if they want to go with a private issue or a public issue. Let's say they decide to go with a private placement. So they will borrow 500 crores each from ICICI and Yes Bank. These 2 banks will buy 5 lakh units each and become the bond holders of the Tata Motors bond. Now, Tata Motors is extremely confident that they'll be able to pay back the principal amount of 500 crore each to ICICI and Yes Bank at the end of 10 years. But until that time, Tata Motors will give ICICI and Yes Bank an interest of 8% of the borrowed money, which in this case is 8% on 500 crores. So ICICI and Yes Bank would get each 40 crore per year for the next 10 years as interest income. And at the end of the 10th year, on maturity, they would get back their principal amount of 500 crores. Now the catch over here is that unlike a traditional loan of 500 crore, a bond of 500 crore can be traded just like we would trade stocks. So tomorrow, if ICICI Bank needs money and HDFC Bank is interested in buying the Tata Motors bond units, ICICI can sell their units to the HDFC Bank. This is how the private issuing of bond works, wherein the entity decides which parties to lend money from. This is very similar to founders deciding who the angel investors in their company will be. Now, if you look at the three major differences between private and public placement, here's a simplified table to understand the same. While in private placement, Tata Motors decides who to borrow money from, which in this case was Yes Bank and ICICI. And if the same bond is publicly placed, then anyone and everyone can become investors, including you, me, banks, etc. Secondly, while in the private placement, Tata Motors can trade the bond off market or in the secondary market, in the public placement, it has to be listed compulsorily with all the details publicly available for investors. So while Tata Motors can actually walk into an ICICI and sell them a bond in private placement, in public placement, they can only do this through listing. And lastly, because of the SEBI regulation now, earlier the unit value for private bond could be as low as 1000 rupees also. But now, it has been raised to 10 lakh rupees. Whereas, for public placement, earlier a company could only raise 100 crore, but now they can even raise 10 crore with a minimum unit value of 10,000 rupees. And because of this, tomorrow an NBFC can raise 10 crore through HNI, mutual fund houses or institutional investors, making it very easy for them to do business. So in short, the risk of private issued bonds is mitigated by increasing the minimum ticket size, and the companies are encouraged to go with the public issue because it is a more transparent system. And this gives investors the access to an additional instrument of investment. Which is why this opens up $2 trillion worth of money to be lent and borrowed, presenting investors and businesses with a mammoth opportunity. Now the question is, how did Wint Wealth become a beneficiary of this regulation, and how did they end up building a $1 million business model around it? Well, let's try to understand this using the simple example of InCred bond. InCred is an NBFC that wants to raise 125 crores, and like we saw in the Tata Motors example, they cannot just go and ask one person for such a huge amount, right? So what will they do? They will create a bond with 1.25 lakh units, with each unit costing 10,000 rupees. Then they will list these bonds publicly where thousands of investors can come and buy these units. But one of the biggest challenges for these companies is how do they find a pool of investors or a channel by which they can reach out to individuals like you and me. And at the same time, from the investor standpoint, how do we decide which company to trust? Because we're talking about a minimum ticket size of 10,000 rupees, wherein our money is going to get locked in for a year or two. So the question is, who is going to verify the details of this company for us? Well, this is where Anshul and Ajinkya started Wint Wealth, which is a bond aggregator platform to become an opportunist in the market. And they positioned Wint as an educator to the investors and aggregators to the companies. And this is how their new age business model works out. Now people listen to this very carefully because you're going to see a rush of numbers. Since InCred wants to raise 125 crores in debt, the bond is split into 1.25 lakh units with each unit costing 10,000 rupees each. Before listing this bond, the Wint team conducts checks to look for 3 types of risk involved in the bond, which are number 1, credit risk, which is the risk of the company going bankrupt and not being able to pay the principal and interest to its investors. Secondly, the check is done for risk of fraud, wherein the company might say that they've got a lot of collateral, but they might not have any collateral. It's like me telling Pars that I own a house worth 25 lakhs when I don't own it at all. In case of InCred, since it's a non-banking finance company, they have their collateral as the personal loans, student loans, secured school financing loans and MSME loans that they have disbursed. And if they fail to pay back the investor money, these assets can be leveraged to secure the money for the investors. And thirdly, there is liquidity risk, which is if the investors need money before the maturity period, what are the chances that they're going to get the money back? So once these 3 risks are checked, the company is approved to get listed in the Wint Wealth platform. Then the Wint Wealth team drives traffic through content marketing, ads, influencer marketing and several other ways to get users to sign up. And once the user signs up and gives his contact to the Wint Wealth team, the Wint Wealth expert team takes over. This is a group of financial experts who get on call with investors like you and me and educate us about the risks involved and how the bond market works. And what blew my mind is that Their customer acquisition cost for a 10,000 rupees ticket is just 500 rupees. Now there's a very peculiar reason for that. I'll come to that later. So coming back, once the investor is ready to invest, the transaction of units is complete, and when enough investors come on board, the bond is declared sold out with 125 crores raised for Incred. And this is where Wint takes a commission from the company, which in this case is Incred. This commission ranges between 0.5 to 1.5%, which amounts to roughly 60 lakhs to 1.8 crores if they raise 125 crores. And in the next 1 or 2 years, Incred is going to use all this money for its operation, and then after 1 or 2 years, Incred is going to start paying back its investors based on the mode of repayment that they have chosen. In this case, let's say you chose Series 3 type of repayment and you invest 1 lakh rupees in this bond. Then you will get 50% of your principal plus interest back at the end of 1 year, which is 50,000 rupees of your principal and 9,520 rupees as your interest. And then after maturity, you will get the other 50% of your principal with interest, which is again 50,000 rupees of your principal and 4,760 rupees in interest. So at the end of 2 years, after investing 1 lakh rupees, you would have a total capital of 1.14 lakh 280 rupees. Apart from that, you have 2 other modes of payment that you can check out in their website. Now the catch over here is that what is so special about Wint Wealth that the rest of the aggregators are not doing? Well, as it turns out, Wint Wealth by default invests 2% into every single bond that they feature in their website. Which means what? In this case, Wint Wealth itself is investing 2.5 crores in the Incred bond. And their money will stay locked in as long as their investors' money is locked in. And if the company defaults, if the investors lose money, Wint Wealth loses money along with its investors. And only after 2 years, when Incred pays its investors back, Wint gets its 2.5 crores plus 35.7 lakhs in interest. So Wint Wealth gets 2.857 crores in total. Out of which, taking 1.5 crores to be their average commission, 1 crore is their assurance capital that commands confidence from their investors. Now to sell a bond worth 125 crores, they spend close to 65 lakhs in customer acquisition, and their gross profit stands at 85 lakhs plus a return from the bond, which is 35.7 lakhs. Both of this put together brings a profit close to 1.2 crores in a typical bond like this. All of this was happening privately, but now, because of the SEBI regulation, this process could be opened up to the public, increasing both the safety and the scope of business. This is how, by spotting a huge gap in the market, by precise assessment of risk, and with insane amount of time spent in educating their customers, this baby startup's customer acquisition cost is as low as 500 rupees. And according to their records, many of these investors invest up to 1 lakh rupees, and soon enough they become repeat investors and invest up to 50 lakh rupees. This is how, through education and their assurance capital, Wint Wealth intends to minimize their customer acquisition cost, eventually increasing their share of gross margins. And if you look at their customer base, from August 2020 to November 2021, in just 15 months, they have gone from 158 investors to 14,142 investors. Their investors in the wait list has shot up from just 1,908 to 81,432 investors. And the average amount subscribed has gone from 10 lakh rupees to 190 crore rupees. Lastly, their goal for the next 18 months is to reach 1 million investors with $2 billion in investment and a revenue of $40 million. This is the story of a new age startup on the rise. And as a YouTube community, this is our first step into covering startup case studies before anyone else in the world, and that too with the information sourced directly from the company itself. And this brings me to the most important part of the episode, and that are the lessons from the case study. Lesson number 1. Every time a regulation or a mandate pops up in your market, keep your eyes and ears wide open because it could be an indication towards a huge untapped market. In case of Asian Paints, it was the ban of foreign companies. In case of renewable energy, it was the increase in import duty. And in this case, it was a regulation by SEBI itself. Lesson number 2. Skin in the game is a highly risky but at the same time an extremely elegant way to command the trust of the audience. In this case, if you see, merely by investing 2%, although on paper it looks like Wint Wealth is taking a very big bet, in reality, it is actually validating its processes and reducing its customer acquisition cost by a large extent. And lastly, the crazy amount of content and transparency that Wint Wealth team brings to the table, both through their content and through their team, is one of the best I've ever seen in the market. This is the reason why they've been able to get the backing of legends like Zerodha brothers and Kunalshah himself. Now, considering this case study, because of your newfound fascination for bonds, do not just go and invest all your money in just one bond. My suggestion is always start with 10,000 rupees, understand the process, understand the risk, and then slowly and steadily increase your investment. So my recommendation is always start with 10,000 rupees. And before we say goodbye, I want to thank the team of Wint Wealth for being super kind and transparent enough that even their business model has been deconstructed to help the thinkschool community learn. And for all of you, do check out their website and try to understand the intricacies of their content game. And if you want to invest in bonds, it's obviously the best platform to do so. That's all from my side for today, guys. If you learned something valuable, please make sure to hit the like button in order to make YouTube Baba happy. And for more such insightful business and political case studies, please subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.